Good evening. Welcome to the November 12th, 2019 Downers Grove Village Council meeting. Mayor Barnett is out of town tonight, so I will be taking his spot with the gavel for tonight's festivities. I am Greg Jose. I'm the Mayor Pro Tem. We have copies of the agendas on either sides of the room here for those of you who are here at 8:01. If you're watching at home, you can download the agenda at www.downers.us. Before we go any further, could we all please stand and say the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. April, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Gray?
Here.
Commissioner Colavini?
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl? Here. Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Mayor Barnett?
Thank you, April. That brings us to item 3 on the agenda, minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set of minutes from November the 5th, 2019. Is there a motion?
Mayor Pro Tem Jose, I move to adopt the council meeting minutes from November 5th, 2019 as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavini?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Jose?
Aye. That matter passes unanimously. That brings us to item 4, public comments. This is a portion of our agenda that we reserve for any public comment on a matter that is not on the agenda tonight. So if anyone would like to come up and say a few words, we'd love to have it.
Good evening. I've prepared some remarks following up the paper I submitted to you and the conversation that we had last week. At last week's council meeting, we heard many residents of Downers Grove beseech this council to finally begin to live up to its professed goal of being a steward of environmental sustainability. I've submitted a paper for your consideration, giving my analysis of what this entails, if those actions are to be anything more than conscience laundering. By conscience laundering, I mean actions that make one feel good about oneself for doing something rather than doing nothing, but which have little effect in actually addressing the problem. Because I have yet to hear back from council, I wanted to follow up the energy and concern displayed last week to connect my analysis to those comments. What most people, including those who spoke last week, failed to appreciate fully is that the goal of environmental sustainability is at root a political economic problem, which is precisely why so little is being done about it. Making environmental sustainability a real goal necessitates reassessing everything about the way of life in the village and around the world. One of the speakers last week drew attention to a statement by a group of 11,000 scientists that calls for substantial changes if humans are to undo their recent impact on the planet's climate. The statement appears in the journal Bioscience and can be found online. While last week's speakers spoke passionately in agreement with the urgency of the need to address climate change, as the target of such efforts, I prefer the phrase the village inadvertently stumbled on, environmental sustainability. I contend this phrase is more apt and accurate because it succinctly captures the challenge we humans face that ecology teaches every living thing faces. As material beings, we are dependent on the environment for the resources we need to sustain ourselves. As conscious beings with big brains, if we are wise, we are mindful of limits on the availability of those resources. Such mindfulness encompasses both our species' material relationship to the environment and our intraspecies social relationships to each other. Dealing with climate change, especially as narrowly interpreted here in the U.S., where the focus has been on various technological ways to reduce carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere, is part of the challenge, but not all of it. As the paper I submitted argues, I find the village council's interpretation and use of the phrase too loose and malleable. unable to convey the urgency, magnitude, and nature of the actions needed. Another reason I prefer the phrase environmental sustainability is that it precludes claims by the political right that the political economic changes the left and the environmental movement proposes for dealing with climate change are unnecessary and wasteful because the bigger influence on climate are fluctuations in the solar cycle. The irony, however, is that some on the right agree with some on the left regarding the degree of change environmental sustainability necessitates. The difference is the right resists making those changes. The scientist's statement is notable in that regard because up till recently, even leading environmental groups have downplayed the extent to which the American way of life must change. Why downplay it? Because one of the great unknowns is whether our democracy, indeed any democracy in the world's rich nations, can hold together when confronted with the need to live environmentally sustainably. Why might this be a problem? Two related reasons. One, until relatively recently, relatively few people in the rich nations bothered to think about the issue. Would anyone dispute, for example, that growth and development in Downers Grove were undertaken oblivious to it? I would hope not. Which means unless one can prove otherwise, one can safely assume the way of life here is presently not environmentally sustainable, which makes reason two all the more problematic. Once people have grown accustomed to and enjoy a way of life, it's hard to conceive it might not be sustainable. A main underpinning of both reasons in the nearly universal belief in, a main underpinning of both reasons is the nearly universal belief in endless economic growth. Given the phenomenal growth and changes people in the world's rich nations have witnessed since the latter half of the 1800s, it's easy to see why we might believe the trend should and will continue. Politics also undergirds this expectation. Government leaders routinely voice belief in economic growth. For one, economic growth is used as the balm for soothing social ills, the preferred technique for righting social wrongs. For another, it's the carrot of hope held out to everyone that they can someday live better than they do at present so long as they work hard. Good government, in effect, is deemed one whose main priority is promoting economic growth. Nevertheless, the credibility of the presumption of endless economic growth is now in doubt. Indeed, among a small but increasing minority, it is in grave doubt. As we heard one speaker last week suggest, some of that doubt is reflected in the realization one aspect of the problem, which the scientist's statement also touches on, is the sheer number of humans walking the earth and the distinct possibility the number needs to fall. The grave element of that prospect is the path of reduction, and whether it will be painful and competitive via the historically traditional methods of war, famine, and disease, amplified by assorted forms of natural disaster, or difficult but cooperative thanks to voluntary restraint, particularly by the well-to-do, the subset of humans who are the most resource rapacious. Did council members hear in that young woman's comment an invitation to ponder restricting or even shrinking the size of the population of Downers Grove or the flow of goods in and out of Downers Grove? As the paper I submitted asserts, and as the scientist's recommendation on economy implies, if one is truly serious about the issue, one must do the unthinkable and address the core question. Is economic growth environmentally sustainable? So let me say again, absent a sound definition, absent metrics by which to assess performance, and absent a time frame for reaching sustainability, however much the village is presently doing to address the matter, one cannot disprove my contentions the way of life in the village is currently not environmentally sustainable, and the residents of the village are not doing nearly enough to move in the direction of attaining sustainability. I'm happy to have you prove me wrong. Please, please do so. I will accept you have done so when good government in Downers Grove is recognized as government that takes as its main priority promoting environmental sustainability. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your comments. I think we're probably in agreement, at least up here on the dais, and stop me if I'm going too far, that economic development's a very positive thing for everyone here in Downers Grove. I think we also can all agree that there's nothing inadvertent about the steps that this village has taken over many, many years and under the guidance of many councils to be greener and become more sustainable. The village routinely wins Green Fleet Awards. We've zoned for solar arrays, made changes to snow plowing and ice melting operations, put solar heating on well houses. We plant hundreds of trees a year. So there's nothing inadvertent about any of those steps. But I think we can all also agree that there's more to do. And this council is committed to that, and I know the staff is committed to that top to bottom. So I look forward to continuing that conversation, and thank you for all of your comments and for continuing to come out and make sure that we are all responsive and accountable to the people of Downers Grove and making us more sustainable as a village. Any other public comment? Please.
Good evening. My name is Preston Straub. I've been here several times. I've been trying to get a report put together for you to review from our attorney, Audrey Anderson. Hasn't materialized. So what I wanted to share with you tonight in regards to the fire alarm system issue that we have with the village, and it's now before the appeals court, is the possibility of resolving this thing somehow. In support of trying to have you put this on your agenda and letting us submit something to you, I promise you it'll be done in the next few days with or without the attorney. I wanted to submit to you a letter that was sent to our residents in Village Square Condominium Association by the fire department, a letter which I feel is nothing more than intimidation and coercion, and it remains unsigned, just the fire department. And it speaks their side of the issue and really doesn't speak the truth of the matter. They suggest that they want life safety, but yet deny us really what we want to do, and that is to remove heat detectors that do not offer life safety and replace them with what's called interconnected smoke detectors, which do offer life safety, so that we have 3 levels. And so that if one of these detectors were to go off in the basement, it would set off the detector on the 2nd floor where your sleeping rooms are. This is what we feel is true life safety. And rather than spend the money on an appeal, we would like to put this money towards this system that we want to install. So with that, I won't be long-winded. I just want to leave you copies of this letter because I doubt that you've seen this letter, but I'd like you to see it. And again, in support of putting this thing on your agenda, hopefully maybe even for next week, so we can get the report to you and maybe get this thing resolved without going through appeals or any other legal processes. I think you may recall we never got the right to present a case to other than department heads. I felt all along, and I said it from the beginning, if you remember me, that we should have had the right to go to some kind of appeals board. I'm hoping you will consider that and maybe, as I said in the past, act as that appeals board and look at the issue yourselves. And then, if you disagree, you can tell us why, okay? And we can resolve it either way without further legal expense. That's all I have to say tonight. Who can I leave these with so that...
If you could leave them with Mr.
you'll get
Baker
a
on the
copy?
end there, please.
There's 10 copies here. That's all I have. Thanks for your time, and have a good night. Have a good meeting.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. That'll bring us to item 5 on the agenda, a public hearing. We actually have a public hearing tonight on the 2020 proposed budget. This public hearing will please come to order. The public hearing has been called by the Village Council to consider the proposed village budget. Notice of this hearing was published in Enterprise Newspapers, Inc., also known as the Bugle, on October the 30th, 2019, and a certificate of publication is made a part of these proceedings. I would like to summarize the procedures which we will follow for tonight's public hearing. First, Dave Fieldman, Village Manager, will provide an overview of the proposed budget. Next, there will be an opportunity for members of the Village Council to ask questions or make comments. Next, there will be an opportunity for members of the public to make statements or comments, or to submit written statements or comments for the record. I will again ask if any member of the Village Council wishes to make a statement or ask a question, and thereafter I will ask for a motion to adjourn. At this hearing, witnesses will not be sworn, and a verbatim written transcript of the statements or testimony given at the hearing will not be prepared. However, a recording of the procedures will be made on village equipment and retained until minutes of the hearing have been prepared and approved by the Village Council. And, oh, by the way, we put all this on YouTube, too. With that, I will turn it over to our Village Manager, Dave Field.
Thank you, Mayor Jose. This is a quick overview of what you can expect from our presentation and discussion during the official budget public hearing tonight. We'll go over the key points and schedule. It will be a refresher from last week. And then we will be presenting what we call the infrastructure funds, which have to do with water, stormwater, and our capital projects fund. Regarding where we are in the process and schedule, you may recall that last week we held our first of 6 meetings, and staff presented the property tax levy, the general fund, and the 4 or 5 funds related to the general fund. Here we are at the second meeting, where we'll be going over the items I just talked about. In total, 6 meetings in the process, and it wraps up with the adoption of the budget and the adoption of the property tax levy in early and mid-December. Plenty of opportunity for community discussion on these items. I'll just represent some of the information from last week, just the overview, a quick summary. The proposed budget for 2020 is a balanced general fund, maintaining the balance in that fund. It's recommended not only by financial rating agencies, but according to our own village policies. There's money in the 2020 budget for support of our village facilities replacement and sustainability plan, which the council will begin undertaking late this year. The plan should be in place by Q1 or Q2 of 2020. The budget does include a $175,000 proposed increase in the property tax levy for operations, the first increase in 9 years. It also includes property tax levy increase for required contributions to the public safety pensions, police and fire under state law. This budget maintains staffing levels, coming on the heels of a 20% reduction of total staffing levels in the last decade. And our commitment to infrastructure is reflected in the proposed budget with over $20 million dedicated or pledged toward those uses, and money in the capital budget also for the replacement of our aging enterprise resource planning system. That was the overview we gave last week. Just a refresher for the record. Tonight, we're focusing in on that $21 million investment in infrastructure. Our strong continuing commitment to top quality infrastructure is reflected in this budget. Each of these infrastructure systems are designed to meet performance standards that have been established by the village, and we hope to maintain and meet those standards at the lowest overall life cycle cost for these systems. Again, over $21 million invested in infrastructure planned for FY20. For this year's budget presentation, we will start with the Water Fund, and in keeping with our tradition, it will be presented by the Assistant Director of Public Works, Stan Balicki.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's good to be back. The Water Fund is an enterprise fund with revenue that is generated from our water customers. Details on this fund can be found on pages 4-24 to 4-25 of the budget book. The objectives for the water system are to provide safe and reliable drinking water, to operate and maintain the water system in the most cost-effective manner, and to achieve stable and sufficient water rates. The water system infrastructure is quite a substantial system. The village purchases water from the DuPage Water Commission, who distributes the water, Lake Michigan water, that is treated and purchased from the city of Chicago. Downers Grove system is made up of 7 elevated storage tanks that have a combined capacity of 8 million gallons. You can see one there on the screen. And there are 6 rate control stations that are throughout the community. Those rate control stations are where our system intakes water from the DuPage Water Commission. Throughout the system, we have approximately 2,800 fire hydrants that provide fire protection for the community, and there are approximately 233 miles of water distribution main that transmits the water that we receive to all of our customers. The picture on the screen is an example of sort of what happens when that water main starts to fail, and that was a result of a water main break that we had to repair a section that was leaking. Also, a couple of other integral parts of the system. We have about 2,800 mainline distribution valves that are periodically placed through the system. They allow us to isolate the system, especially when we have to do maintenance on it. And we also control the system through a remote monitoring system that can be done either from our Public Works Department or, frankly, from just about any remote location with an internet connection, but it allows us to monitor and control the flow of the water through the system. So that's an overview of the system itself. Some details on the water fund that is proposed for FY 2020. In FY20, revenues are projected to be $19.36 million. As you can see, and expenses are expected to be $20.87 million. The revenues include $3.5 million of IEPA loans that we continue to use that program. The major categories of water fund expenses are shown in this slide on the screen for 2020. The breakdown, the single largest expense that we have in the water fund is the purchase of water that is estimated to be just shy of $9 million, and it represents about 43% of the total expenses in the water fund. Capital costs are the next largest expense within the water fund. They are planned to be $5.68 million, or about 27% of the total expenses. Operations and maintenance, you can see, are at $4.34 million, about 21% of the total, and debt service is expected to be $1.86 million, 9% of the total expenses. With respect to capital plans for 2020, the major capital expenditures for 2020 are for water main replacement at $5 million. And we will also continue with facility improvements and begin some well rehabilitation work. And on this last slide, you can see that the 2020 budget includes a rate increase of 4.6% that's effective July 1st, as recommended by the water rate study that was completed this year. You can see the typical household impact for that rate increase in Downers Grove will be about $23 per year. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you, Stan.
You're welcome.
But wait, there's more. We have a couple further presentations related to a different type of water this time. This time it's the water that falls from the sky when it rains. It is a stormwater fund. In keeping with our tradition, this fund will be presented by the Director of Public Works, Nan Newland.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Council. As Dave said, I'm going to provide an overview of the Stormwater Fund. It's similar in size and complexity to the Water Fund, one of our other large systems in the village. This is also an enterprise fund that was created by the village in 2013 to provide revenues to complete capital projects and increase the level of operations and maintenance for this program throughout the village. This work is being accomplished through a plan that was adopted by the council and includes planned increases to the stormwater fee to fund the work and bond issuances to fund capital projects. More information about the Stormwater Fund can be found on pages 4-20 through 4-22 in the budget books. This slide shows the proposed revenues and expenses for the Stormwater Fund for 2020. Revenues are projected to be $5.54 million and expenses of $9.98 million, with a remaining fund balance of $1.13 million. Expenses will exceed revenues, as you see, in 2020 as we continue to spend down the 2019 bond issuance of $7 million on capital projects. 2020 projected revenues include $5.04 million from the stormwater fee, and the remainder of the revenue includes grants and developer contributions to this fund. These revenues will fund the completion of capital projects that reduce flooding and improve drainage throughout the village. The $9.98 million of planned expenses in the Stormwater Fund include $5.84 million of capital projects, $2.86 million of operations and maintenance, and $1.28 million for debt service to pay for the bond issuance we had. On this slide, you'll see the green and yellow stars show the locations where projects from the 2014 Stormwater Project Analysis, also referred to as the SPA, were completed this year, 2019. And you'll see the red and the blue stars show the locations of the planned projects for 2020. So together you'll see the 2019 and 2020 projects throughout the village. In 2020, we will complete the last two remaining non-floodplain projects recommended in the SPA, which includes the areas referred to as Burlington Highlands and the Hobson Triangle, our two remaining projects. And on this slide, you'll see locations of all the stormwater projects we've completed since 2007 throughout the village. The proposed 2020 capital budget includes Phase 2 of a comprehensive stormwater level of service analysis throughout the village to assist in identifying and prioritizing projects for the future, which is a village council priority action item. So as we're wrapping up the SPA projects, this will help us identify projects needed in the future and help us to prioritize how those projects are completed. Focusing again for a minute on the 2020 projects themselves. As I said, we'll be completing projects in Burlington Highlands, the Hobson Triangle, which are SW 080. That's the largest portion of the expenses. In addition, we have earmarked funds to complete stream bank and water quality improvements in the south branch of the St. Joe's Creek. We will be assisting the Park District with funding to dredge Prince Pond, replacing failing storm sewers and head walls, and as I said, completing Phase 2 of the level of service plan. And we will be continuing with our neighborhood cross-share program, which we did slightly increase revenues to meet demand for these neighborhood and projects. This last slide shows the financial impact to the typical household. Includes the 8.7% rate increase, which results in approximately $13 in addition per year per household. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Nan. Any questions on the Stormwater Fund? All right.
And
I know
finally,
there's
completing
more.
our trifecta of Public Works leadership presentations, our other Assistant Director of Public Works, John Welch, will present information on the Capital Projects Fund.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Dave said, my name is John Welch. I'll give a brief overview on the activities funded within the Capital Projects Fund. You can find that on pages 4-28 to 4-30 in your budget book. Excuse me. The village's objectives for the management of our capital infrastructure program are to use a systematic approach. We coordinate the timing of projects and group projects geographically to achieve an economy of scale. In fiscal year 20, $7.16 million is anticipated for revenues in this fund, with $9.29 million in expenses. Revenues for this fund come from home rule sales tax, property tax, telecom taxes, and grants. The $2.13 million difference represents the spending down of the fund balance. Capital projects planned for 2020 are shown. Village streets make up the majority of the capital projects for every year. When we add motor fuel tax funding, we plan to spend over $3.7 million on street maintenance, which includes resurfacing, crack filling, patching, and pavement sealing. In addition to the village program, residents will also see continued improvements on 55th Street and 75th Street by DuPage County. In 2020, the village also plans to spend over $1.3 million for sidewalk improvements, including maintenance and new construction with the crossing of the south branch of St. Joseph Creek. The village is also planning to complete sidewalk gaps on Ogden Avenue. Traffic projects also include traffic signal replacement at on Finley Road at Finley Mall, a new traffic signal on 63rd Street at Springside, and Fairview Station light replacements. I walked quickly through a few of the major projects. Here is a summary of all the planned projects with expenditures just over $6.4 million. And with that, I'd like to open up to any questions.
So that completes our presentation. Brief overview of what we call infrastructure or capital funds. Just a reminder for those watching or participating in these meetings, each of the council members have been briefed individually in a lot of detail. That's why there's a lot of familiarity and head nodding among council members as they present this. They've heard this many times before. And we talked about many of these concepts as part of the summertime long-range planning sessions. With that, Mayor Pro Tem, we're happy to answer any questions, not only these funds, but also the funds that were presented last week.
Thank you, Mr. Fielder. Commissioner Colvini.
I had one detailed question. Where are we on the spending curve related to the Emerald Ash Borer? In other words, how many ash trees are left out of the total? We have a rough idea of that?
I don't remember it off the top of my head, but what we'll do is we'll treat that as a council question and get information of the entire council.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
I would just like to say thank you. I've been asking for streetlights improvements in the Fairview downtown area forever, it seems like. We're finally getting there, and we're getting them, and I know there's some grant money that comes along with that. So I really appreciate the work everybody's done trying to get that area revitalized. So thanks for the streetlights in advance. That's all I have.
Any other comments or questions from the council? I missed last week's meeting, and I don't want to go too far into the past, but I first want to say thank you to staff for all of the work that goes into preparing this budget. It's incredibly easy to read and understand, and I think it's easy to see why Downers Grove has won so many budget awards over the years. Obviously, there's a lot of building going on in Downers. This is reflective of our commitment to maintaining our infrastructure at the appropriate level and doing it at the lowest possible cost. And I think that is a goal that we've had for a long time, and it's one I hope that the village will remain committed to for many, many years to come. Because I missed last week's meeting, I didn't get a chance to talk about the general fund and some of the other pieces of the budget, and I thought I'd go ahead and take this opportunity, since it is a public hearing after all. Obviously, we've got a balanced budget. It's been balanced for quite some time now, many, many years. But we have something new in the budget in terms of a property tax increase for village operations. We haven't had one in the last 8 years, and that's almost unprecedented. I don't think there are too many governments out there that can say that they kept their property taxes flat for 8 years. The fact of the matter is that's the one revenue source that we can absolutely count on. Nobody likes it, and nobody wants to treat anybody's home as an ATM, because frankly you can't walk up to it and get cash out of it. And everybody up here understands that. But it is the only revenue source that when we levy it, it comes in. Sales taxes fluctuate. The food and beverage taxes fluctuate. The taxes and fees related to building permits or related to telecom or what have you all fluctuate. And it really only represents a very small portion of the revenue that we get. We have a general fund budget of about $49.7 million. And the property tax for operations reflects something close to $6.5 million. If I could flip to the right page. Yeah, $6.02 million. It's a pretty small percentage. At some point, the ability to keep the property tax flat has to end. None of us like it, but the fact of the matter is that costs go up, and they only continue to go up. Staff does a great job at bending the cost curve everywhere possible, and I think this budget is reflective of that. There's a $462,000 decrease in the risk management fund, and that is a tremendous win. That means we've got a safer workforce and a healthier and happier workforce as a result, and that is a huge win. It saves us money, but things like that don't happen every day, every year, with every budget. We've seen inflation in healthcare costs as a village that are beating national averages, that are beating regional averages. The fact that we are coming in so far less than the typical 7 to 8% medical trend every year is phenomenal. And that, once again, goes to staff. We also have a large number of priority action items that are large in scope. We're at some point going to consider whether or not to knock this building down and the one adjacent to it in order to build the new facilities that are right-sized and will house the village operations and those of the police department for what we hope are decades to come. We have to replace our enterprise software. We have to finish what we've started with regard to planning for the future of downtown. The list goes on. All of these things require time, they require staff, they require additional revenue. So while nobody likes the idea of a property tax increase, and we've gotten to a point where we think that, oh, maybe it's just something that it's just routine, that we can find a way to budget without one. At some point, we have to actually engage in one. And I think that time has come. And it's not done with anything less than incredibly serious reflection, and it's done with an eye toward getting everything done that our residents expect, and that I think this council has set forth for all of us and for staff and our residents through the long-range plan. So if we're going to commit ourselves to increase sustainability, that's going to cost additional revenue. We're going to commit ourselves to these new facilities that cost more. We're going to be talking about human services. That costs more. And I'm willing to bet that given the conversation about facilities and ERP and the way the enterprise software, sorry to talk in jargon, but the way these projects are moving at the same time at fairly high speed, and the possibility that we might need to push the pause button on facilities as a result, if we had another person on staff, maybe we can keep both of those going. Might be a question worth asking. So we've gone an awful long time, but we cannot continue, as former Mayor Tully said, to continue to ask staff to do more and more with less and less until we get to the point where we ask them to do everything with nothing. I'll relinquish the soapbox now. That brings us to comments from the public. Now, I just want to remind folks that this is the only spot on the agenda where the budget is going to be talked about. So if you have any comments, whether it's related to any of the capital funds, please come forward, or anything else with regard to the budget. And there's a stampede to the microphone. All right. Any other comments from the village council? All right. With that, could I have a motion to adjourn the public hearing on the 2020 FY budget?
I move to adjourn the public hearing on the 2020 budget.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you all very much. That brings us to item 6 on the agenda. That is our consent agenda. Is there a motion with regard to the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any discussion on the consent agenda? Any public comment? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Jose?
Aye. That matter passes unanimously. That brings us to item 7, our active agenda. We have 2 items. May I have a motion with regard to item A, to an ordinance to amend alarm system requirements?
Mayor, I move to adopt an ordinance amending alarm system requirements as presented.
Second.
Any council comments or questions? Any public comment? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Jose?
Aye. That matter passes unanimously. That brings us to item B, an ordinance to amend construction site management permits and provisions concerning the protection of trees and shrubs.
I move to adopt an ordinance amending construction site management permits and amending provisions concerning the protection of trees and shrubs, including a change to section 24.7B, changing the required 24 inches of tree to 18 inches of tree, as presented.
Second.
Any questions, comments from the council? Mr. Fieldman, you looked eager. No.
I'm a little excited about the change, so I was,
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Colvin.
I agree with the change to 18 inches. Would love to see it down to 10 inches, but we have a limited staff, and there's only so much we could do. Plus, the trees are protected. It's really just related to the meeting, the pre-meeting that they would have with the builder. So I definitely agree with that change.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Any public comment? Good evening, Mr. Lerner.
My name is Ken Lerner. I submitted comments via email earlier, and the remark system on behalf of the Pierce Downer Heritage Alliance, and I just want to amplify a couple of the points there from those comments without belaboring all of them. But I would say, first of all, I just want to say that we're happy to see the council recognizing that even though we've had parkway tree protections for several years now, that there are ongoing issues with construction projects and impacts on parkway trees, and it's a good idea to revisit that, and there's a need to strengthen the protections in certain ways. So glad to see the issue being recognized and a solution being addressed here. The measures in the proposed ordinance seem appropriate, and I certainly support the amendment that was suggested here in terms of reducing the size of the tree that triggers the additional requirements in section 24.7B. I would, and we suggested in the comments that really some of those requirements, the early consultation requirement, the meeting requirement in point 1 of that section, and the third part where requiring additional approval of trenching and augering procedures really could be implemented appropriately, I think, for any location that has parkway trees of any size. It's always a good idea to have a consultative process that helps you avoid unintended consequences that can damage trees and make everyone aware of the fact that this is an issue, this is something the village cares about, and that the trees are important. And lastly, I just want to say because trees are important and we have seen that they are impacted by construction activities, I would hope that someday, in the fullness of time, or maybe even sooner, that we could consider measures to protect all of the trees on a site where a construction project is going on, not just the parkway trees, as many other towns have done in the Chicago area. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lerner. I'll bring it back to council one more time. Any other comments? Commissioner Gray?
I had one quick question. Mr. Lerner, thank you again for your email, for your insight. I want to know if we ever got a definition from last week for, I think it was mentioned, for the nuisance tree. I think in our section 24.6, it kind of mentions that, but we had a resident that was getting clarity, and I think it was mentioned this week. And so I just wanted to find out if we've gotten that definition clarified as it relates to this ordinance.
Yeah, we've clarified. If you take a look at the staff report that's published in the agenda material in the update box, we've added some clarification there. The ordinance was not amended to include a definition of nuisance tree because the village does not classify any parkway tree as a nuisance, except that under section 24.6 of the ordinance, any live or dead tree which is infected with an infectious disease or harbors vectors, which is insects or arthropods, shall be declared a public nuisance. But there's no need then, therefore, to actually define the phrase nuisance tree.
Thank you. I remember reading that and thought that that was the definition that clarified that, but just wanted to make sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, how often does arthropod get used in the village council?
I love it.
I stumbled across it a little bit there, too. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. I just want to thank my colleagues and everybody who spoke publicly for all of their comments and their thorough treatment of the issue. I especially want to thank Commissioner Earl for bringing forward the idea of going from 24 down to 18 inches and protecting more trees. If there's no other comment, roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Calavini?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Peavitt?
Aye.
Mayor Jose?
Aye. That matter passes unanimously. That ends our active agenda and brings us to the first reading. We have two items. This is where we hear about these items for the first time in a workshop format, and typically staff presents them. So I will turn it over once again to Village Manager Fieldman.
And I will immediately turn it over to Deputy Village Manager Mike Baker for the annual presentation of the estimated aggregate tax levy. Mike.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This item presents the total estimated tax levy, which is required by state law. Since we're talking about the tax levy, I thought I would take the opportunity to review some of the information that was shared last week as we introduced the levy as part of the budget process. Our popular dollar bill chart, which shows the village's portion of the tax bill at 9.56% of the overall tax bill. You can see how all the other entities and taxing bodies make up the typical tax bill in Downers Grove. The village's portion, the village's levy actually includes 5 components, many of which were discussed this evening. The first 2 rows reflecting the fire and police pension portions of the levy and the required contributions that must be made for those pensions. The third and fourth rows reflect what's referred to as the operations portion of the levy, and you can see there the increase as proposed. Turning to the impact to an individual property, the typical household with a market value of about $300,000 will see an increase of just under $33 based on the proposed levies shown previously. And what I'm showing here is a summary of the total estimated levy that shows how we get from that total amount, which we're required to present as part of this item, down to the amount that ultimately upon which tax bills are based. So the figure at the very top, just over $30 million, represents all items, levy items that we're required to present. However, a significant number of them will never appear on the actual tax levy amount. The abatements refer to dollar amounts for which the village has other sources of funding available to pay these levy amounts. They're typically debt service payments So we are not required, we do not need to use the property tax levy to make these payments. We will use water fees, stormwater fees, and tax increment financing revenue to make those debt service payments. The library levy also is shown here, and the total amount for special service area levies is $342,000. Once you deduct those three items, then the $14.6 million amount that appeared on the previous slide is what the 2019 village levy will be. That's the amount it will be. And you can see how that compares to the 2018 levy and those increases, as I referred to earlier, for public safety pensions and operations. That concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Any questions or comments from the council? Any questions or comments from members of the public? Last chance. No? Thank you.
Thank you. The last item on tonight's first reading agenda is consideration of an ordinance authorizing a special use for the property at 2300 Wisconsin Avenue. Here to present the background information on this item is our Community Development Director, Stan Popovich.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. At tonight's meeting with special use request for 2300 Wisconsin at Unit 318. We've seen a few of these come through recently. This is another similar request. 2300 Wisconsin, again, is on Wisconsin Avenue just west of Belmont Road in the Ellsworth Industrial Park. The building consists of 3 buildings with multiple industrial and auto-related uses in there. Unit 318 is in the rear of the property, on the north side of the property there. Petitioner is requesting a special use to provide high-end specialty automotive repair repairs at this location. The floor plan shows 2 automotive workspaces and 3 stacking within the building itself, and then some open offices as well, in the washroom as well. We do look at zoning this way to make sure that parking is adequate for these uses that do come in, and while we continue to increase parking at this area, there is adequate parking provided on the site with this use proposed as well. With regard to the comprehensive plan looks at this area as light industrial business park, looks to minimize negative impacts in residential neighborhoods and to provide opportunities for contemporary users. At the October Plan Commission meeting, the Plan Commission found that the special use standards were met for approval. If there's any questions at this time, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
Thank you, Stan. Any questions from the council? Commissioner Earl?
Hi, Stan. This is, what, the third special use for auto in this?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Do we have a maximum number as to what we could allow, or they'd all just keep rolling into special use and we look at them one by one?
There's no maximum in the ordinance. When this building first got developed, there was a limit. There was no automotive uses permitted, no special uses in this category permitted, and then that ordinance was changed a couple of years ago to permit this type of use, but again, to look at it on an individual basis, because at that time staff was concerned about the influx of cars maybe being parked outside that were being repaired. But what we've seen so far is a lot of these specialty things where the cars are dropped off and stored inside rather than stored outside.
And that continues to remain the case with this petition?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And they're for all high-end vehicles, if I recall.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? Members of the public? Questions, comments? I think that does it.
That is our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fieldman. And I'm going to throw it right back to you for the manager's report.
Well, I have a very quick manager's report. I am very pleased to announce that the Chicago Area Clean Cities has bestowed upon the Village of Downers Grove the 2019 Chicago Area Clean Cities Leader Award. A little bit about the Clean Cities initiative. It is part of the U.S. Department of Energy's Clean City program. It is to advance energy, economic, and environmental security of the U.S. By supporting local decisions to adopt practices that reduce the use of petroleum and petroleum consumption. We've been a leader in environmental stewardship on fleet for several years, and now we're getting the Chicago Area Leader Award. More information on that will be posted on the village website in the coming days. Thank you.
That's great news. Thank you, Mr. Fieldman.
That ends our report.
The attorney's report, Ms. Petrarca.
Thank you, Mayor. Only one item tonight, and that is the ordinance permitting a special use for 2300 Wisconsin. That will be
Thank you. That brings us to item 11, the council member reports. This is an opportunity for my colleagues to report out on goings-on in the community or other thoughts they might have. I'll start with my right, to my right, with Commissioner Cullivaney. Good evening.
Yeah, just a brief comment. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The Downers Grove Historical Society is pleased that our event, History on Tap, has sold out for Thursday evening. This is our first annual, so if you wanted a ticket, you have to just wait until next year.
They're not available on StubHub.
Not yet.
All right.
However, I have one.
Thank you. Commissioner Sadowski, if you get.
No report, Mayor.
Commissioner Walls.
I do have a report, Mayor. Thank you. Shock, I know. The 16th annual Bonfield Express 5K is almost here. Thanksgiving morning, November 28th at 8:30. You can register at bonfieldexpress.com. It is a Downers tradition. That is all, Mayor.
Thank you very much.
May I ask what the weather's going to be that day?
It is, yes, you may. Because my children cry every year because it's so cold, it is going to be delightfully warm. You will not need to wear several layers. Wonderful weather.
You've got a pretty high bar given the weather you've come through with in the past. So.
I know, I'm a little nervous.
All right, we're counting. Commissioner Earl.
Just want to express my condolences to you. I know you lost your stepfather recently, and I know he's a very important figure in your life, and you weren't here last week due to the arrangements, but my deepest sympathies to you, your family, your mom, everyone. I know it was very hard.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Commissioner Gray.
Thank you. I wanted to, this past weekend I had a chance to see for the first time something called the Illinois Music Education Association District 1 Festival, which was something that brings together young musicians from across the state in this beautifully organized performance across things like chorus and jazz and orchestra. And so this is kind of two-part. After witnessing this, thank you to all the educators and the music educators across our area and across the state who pull off something this amazing, and kind of carrying that a little bit forward. There is a musical called Freaky Friday that is taking place the 14th of this month, the 15th of this month at 7:30, and November 17th at 2 p.m. at Herrick Middle School at the cafetorium. I love it when they kind of combine the cafeteria and the auditorium together. And so just as a way to continue to support our arts and to continue to support the individuals that help our young people grow in this area, if it's something of interest, please check it out, Freaky Friday, the musical. Thank you.
Thank you. As Commissioner Earl said, I did miss last week's meeting due to a funeral. My stepdad, Bob Traxler, passed away at the age of 88. In a very real sense, I would not be here without him. My parents actually met on his first campaign for Congress in 1974. My dad passed on when I was young, and he and my mom reconnected in 2002, and the rest, as they say, is history. He was an extraordinary public servant and served in the Michigan legislature and then the United States House of Representatives for about 19 years. And he was a great source of inspiration and advice, comfort, laughs, everything you can imagine. He was a great guy and he'll be missed. So thank you again, Commissioner Earl. I know whether it was by text or email or call, everyone on the council expressed their condolences, and I really appreciate that. It's very heartfelt. And thank you all. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Cullivaney?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Jose?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a great night.